Hello friends and welcome back to another Magic Monday. Today we are looking at a deck with Gev, Scaled Scorch, a 2 mana cost lizard mercenary with ward, pay 2 life. He's a 3/2, he's already pretty strong, but then you add his ability. Other creatures you control enter with an additional 1/1 counter on them for each opponent who lost life this turn. Now in Magic Arena, we only have one opponent, but for tabletop, Brawl, or EDH, or whatever you want to call it, this can be pretty broken. Whenever you cast a lizard spell, Gev Scaled Scorch deals 1 damage to target opponent. So off the bat, any lizard you cast when you got this guy in play comes in with a 1/1 counter, because the triggered effect of the 1 damage happens before the creature enters the battlefield. So that's cool, and obviously this is a lizard tribal deck. It's also called Lizards of the Coast, which I think is kind of delightful. 49 creatures, 10 non-creatures, average mana 3.1, much heavier red than black. Of those 49 creatures, 24 are lizards. That includes, like, I don't know, things that are like lizard mercenary or lizard rogue, things like that. But 24 lizards, excuse me, and 4 shapeshifters as well. So those also count. 2 instants, 2 sorceries, 10 artifacts. We don't even really have mana rocks in this deck, but we'll get to that in a second. 2 enchantments, including 1 as a class, and 40 lands. Excuse me. All right, so incriminate, some crowd control here, cut down some crowd control there. So I'm going to skip over the crowd control because that's boring. Like that. Here's one of our shapeshifter lizards. So he comes in as a 2/2 that can't be blocked, which is awesome. This is here, not because she's a lizard, but just for the drafting. I also wanted to have like a sub-theme of drafting stuff. And then we've got a bunch of lizards. This guy, if you can pay that offspring cost every time you play a land, it's dealing 2 damage to target opponent, which can also help scale up your lizards as they come into play, which is cool. Basically every lizard you could think of that's available in Arena is in this deck. This Hired Claw. Whenever you attack with 1 or more lizards, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. There's a lot of indirect damage in this deck. We also have a little bit of a sub-theme of dragons, but not super strong. There's just not quite enough lizards to make an adequate Brawl deck for my liking. So I did add dragons because they're kind of like, you know, big lizards. Terrible thunder lizards in some cases. This guy's cool. He's a squirrel, but whenever he attacks, each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of things, including lizards, that you control. And here's our enchantment class, Artist's Talent. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you may discard a card, and if you do, draw a card. That's not coming into effect very often. Level 2, non-creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Not going to come into effect very often. Level 3, if a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much +2 instead. That's why it's here. You just kind of slowly plot away at getting this up to level 3, and then every time a lizard comes into the battlefield, Gev is dealing 3 damage to the opponent. And because of the non-combat damage, we've got things like Chandra's Pyreling that gets bonuses and double strike. We've got this other dragon thing in here because it helps make other dragons cheaper. If an opponent lost life this turn, add red-black. So basically this guy comes in for free as long as our commander's out, which is kind of fun. Whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, creature, or land that isn't a mana ability, this deals 1 damage to that player. So again, tons of indirect damage with lizards. I actually didn't realize that until I started building this. Whenever a player casts a non-creature spell, this deals damage to that player equal to the number of non-creature spells they've cast this turn. Sometimes this hurts us, mostly it hurts our opponent. Non-creature spells you cast from exile have Convoke, irrelevant, and then you can discard a card and then exile the top 2 cards of your library at the beginning of your first main phase, and you can choose one of them to play this turn. So if we've got, you know, too much land in our hand and in the battlefield, for example, we could just discard that land, look at the top 2, and play one of those instead. A little bit of flexibility to dig through the deck faster. This one can be disguised and then flipped over to deal non-combat damage. At the beginning of your second main phase, if an opponent lost life this turn, exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one, and you can play it until the end of turn, which is pretty cool. Metallic Mimic, because it makes all of our lizards even bigger. This one, if they lost life this turn, which again, there's constant non-combat damage here, so all of these conditions are really easy to meet. But we can force them to discard a card, and that's cool. Here's our other enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, amass Orcs X, where X is that excess damage, and then we can use this to deal 7 damage to target creature. Not super critical, because most of our non-combat damage goes to the opponent and not to creatures, but there are some things that target creatures, so I just figured I'd throw it in here. Plus, it gives us some blockers with the Orcs. Whenever this thing attacks while saddled, exile the top card of your library, and you can play it until the end of your next turn, which is pretty cool. Haste. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, this deals 2 damage to target opponent. So if I play 2 cards in a turn, it still deals 2 damage to target opponent, and that's really cool. This one just has prowess and first strike if it's attacking. If a lizard you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much +1 instead. Awesome. We put in Laughing Jasper Flint. I considered making him the commander, but there's so many Jasper Flint decks out there that I figured I would use him as one of the 99. So he's mostly just here because he's a lizard, but his ability is really cool. This one lets us perpetually gain Battle Cry on this card, and it can stack. So that's very powerful, potentially, because it's whenever he or another lizard you control enters the battlefield. And then when he or another lizard you control dies, target opponent loses a life and you gain a life. Here we have a lizard warlock that we can tap to add 2 mana to cast dragon spells, which is neat. This is actually when I decided to start putting dragons in, because I put this guy in there. I'm like, well, his ability is totally useless unless I have dragons, so let's put in some dragons. Now we've got this automaton that gets our lizards 1/1. We've got this guy who will get 1/1 counters whenever lizards enter. This, we choose creature and make our lizards cheaper. This gets our lizards bigger. This is a lizard and seeks a lizard. This gets our lizards bigger. And this makes our lizards 2 mana cheaper to cast. Now we get into some of the more flexible parts of this deck. Bloodletter. If an opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that much instead. So we're doubling Gev, and if we have out any of those enchantments, it could be like play a lizard, opponent loses 6 life. It's stupid. Daggercaster deals 1 damage to each opponent and 1 damage to each creature your opponents control when it enters the battlefield. That's good against those Scoot Swarm decks. This one gives Outlaws haste. There's not a lot of Outlaws unless Laughing Jasper Flint is out, in which case they're all Outlaws. But basically he's just here because he's a rogue. A lizard rogue, specifically. Here's a dragon. I just put it in there because why not? I did put in this god. If a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than his power, I'm not going to try to say his name, to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to his power instead. So instead of 1 damage for casting a lizard spell, it is 4 damage, and that is stupid broken. This one, it would double the non-combat damage they deal. So honestly, you can attack with this deck, but you don't really have to. You're just building up some blockers, ideally with 1 or more +1/1s on them, and you're just dealing non-combat damage. It's kind of fun to like play a defensive red-black deck, because that's like more of a blue strategy, right? You're playing super defense, whereas like red is known for its aggression, and like here the aggression is all indirect, which I really like. But it doesn't have to be, because we've got this Stingerback Terror, and we've got this Bone Horde Dracosaur. Neither of those are indirect, but they were just dragons to put in because why not? But I did skip a couple things like Toralf, God of Fury. Whenever a creature, planeswalker, an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage, he deals damage equal to the excess to any other target. Not super useful, but it has some uses. I like this guy. He's got a ward of 3 life, he's got menace, and whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, so you do have to attack, conjure a random card from his spell book into exile, and you may play it this turn. That can be Blade Juggler, Body Count, draw a card for each creature that died under your control this turn. Return up to 2 target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. I mean, the flexibility here, it is a conjure, but it does give us some flexibility, and quite a bit of it is actually with card draw. Like this Reveler will help us draw some cards, or this will just help us do some damage. So yeah, it's just a flexible card, and again, I wanted to have like a sub-draft theme. Roaming Throne, obviously you choose Lizard, and then everything doubles. So Gev is doing 2 damage instead of 1. Or the... not that one. Where is he? This guy. So instead, whenever he or another lizard you control dies, opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Or doubles up Battle Cry, which can be really nice. So Roaming Throne is awesome in this deck. Gold Span Dragon, because dragon, and yeah, why not? Here is 5 damage to target creature and opponent controls. So here is some non-combat damage to creature. And will also help us occasionally make treasure tokens, but mostly, I don't know, it's just a removal card that we can then utilize as a creature. Here's a Lizard Warrior. Not great, but it does let us steal a creature from our opponent, or we can cast it, or we could use his ability on one of our own things to give it haste, which is kind of nice. So we could actually play him and just give him haste for the turn to end a game. Terror of the Peaks, because it's Terror of the Peaks. Wrathful Red Dragon, because there are a fair number of dragons in here. Ancient Copper Dragon, let us make those treasure tokens. Chandra's Incinerator. I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on this guy, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. So there are turns where we could play this guy for 1 red, and a 6/6 trample for 1 red is not bad. And then he also can do non-combat damage to target creature or planeswalker whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent. So despite the fact that he doesn't fit with the lizard theme, he's an elemental. The fact that we play Gev, he deals 2/4 damage in a turn, and then we can target a non-player permanent that our opponent controls. And if we have out Toralf, like, it just stacks. It's really broken. Ancient Brass Dragon lets us return stuff in case there's a lot of board wipes. And Dragon Mage helps with the card draw, because sometimes we'll be down to, 2 or fewer cards in hand, and we just want that card draw so that we can keep triggering Gev with our non-combat damage. Bunch of lands, it's all what you would expect. I did put in Mudflat Village as well, because we can return a lizard from our graveyard to our hand by sacrificing it. So that's kind of it, guys. Oh, this one's fun too. Target lizard you control gets +1/0 and gains haste until end of turn. So that's good for some flexibility if we decide we want to attack. But again, it's not really predicated on attacking. It's a lot of non-combat damage. Even Terror of the Peaks is non-combat damage. So it's a very defensive red-black deck. But you notice there's like no mana rocks in here at all. And if you were going to make a change and you wanted to make it a little bit faster, I mean, there's a Dark Ritual, but if you're going to make it a little bit faster, if that's your goal, there's some things you could take out, like this Fall of Kara Andros. It doesn't get triggered that often. You could take that out and put in a whatever, Mox Amber or Arcane Signet or whatever. So like there's some wiggle room here with stuff. But for the most part, mana is not really an issue. And the commander is 2 mana. Like I said, the average mana cost is 3.1, but that's with a lot of dragons in here. So like the great majority of stuff is 3 and under. So mana is not really an issue, at least from my experience, unless you just have bad luck. But anyway, friends, this is the deck. It is Lizards of the Coast. It's super fun to play. I really like changing up the archetype on the red-black thing, like I said, and playing it as a more defensive deck. If you guys enjoy this video, you know what to do. As always, be kind to yourselves, be kind to each other. Let's get to some games. See you in the next video.